This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
The Science Notes podcast on OAR FM Dunedin, brought to you by the Division of Sciences at the University of Otago. I'm Dave McMorrin. Over the next half hour, I'll be chatting with a graduate science student about their research, their passion for science, and the things that fuel their creativity. Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of Science Notes. My name's Dave McMorrin, and this time our guest is Kasey Hutchison. Hi, Kasey.
Kia ora, how are we doing?
I'm well on this typically Dunedin spring day, and that there's snow all around the hills.
That sounds about right.
And almost November, but that's all right.
It's always the way, right?
Yeah.
The most snow I've ever seen in Dunedin has always been in October.
Yep. So, in fact, it's the first snow of the winter, isn't it?
I think so.
First on the ground on the hills.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, just in time for Christmas. Excellent. So, Kasey is doing a Master's in Botany at Otago University.
Surely am.
And so we're going to talk a bit this time about what she's been doing for her study in what, as we will find, is perhaps not a plant in the way that you might imagine a botanist would be interested in. But before we get into that, how do you find yourself doing a Master's in Botany at Otago?
Well, I actually started out at uni in archaeology and forensics.
Right.
The archaeology stuck. That's a good thing.
Yep.
So I did my undergrad and Bachelor of Arts and Science, started off with forensics as my science, but by the end of my first year, having done Bio 1, 2, 3, plants and how they shape the world,
yes,
I was in love with botany.
It wasn't just the chemistry that put you off.
It might have been.
You can say that.
The chemistry might have been the reason I couldn't. But I love botany. I changed it into it at the start of my second year, and it's safe to say it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. Yep. Still in love with archaeology, so technically my field is archaeobotany. So I did my honours through archaeology/anthropology and botany.
Which, of course, is part of geology at Otago, isn't it?
Part of anthropology.
Is that part of anthropology?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So anthropology technically is my degree, but I mean archaeology side.
Yep.
And so I did that as archaeology/botany route, looking at macrobotanical plant remains. And by macrobotanical, I mean the size of my thumb being the biggest size of my remains. And then now in my master's, I'm doing it more botany side for the lichens. Still got that archaeology aspect.
Yep.
Which was really cool.
So that's still the why underlying everything what you're doing.
Absolutely, yeah. So always love archaeology, but being able to sort of narrow my field into archaeobotany is so much. I think it was really what I was meant to do. The more I sort of look at my earlier life, the more I'm I was always meant to be in the botany field, which is really cool, I think.
So this interest in archaeology, is this not like a dinosaur thing from when you were little? Or?
It's Egypt.
Yeah, it's an Egyptology thing. There you are.
I was an Egyptology kind of gal.
Wonderful.
And then I moved into Percy Jackson.
Excellent. So you're doing your studies through botany, but like I said at the start, you're not really studying a plant as such. You're studying lichens.
Oh, yeah.
And lichens are one of these things which everybody... whether they know it or not, I've undoubtedly seen one of. As we were saying earlier, I was looking at some out my kitchen window this morning.
Amazing.
But people don't necessarily know what they are, or indeed how complicated and interesting they are. So tell us about lichens.
It would be my pleasure.
Yeah.
I'm very good at yapping about lichens. It's one of my specialties. So lichens are not mosses, and I can tell you that much. My most common question when I say I study lichens is that mossy stuff on the ground? And the answer is, no, it's not that mossy stuff. Those are quite different. Lichens instead are a symbiotic relationship between a fungus and an alga, and sometimes a cyanobacterium.
Right.
Sometimes all three, which would be a tripartite lichen technically, and that's just where they've got extra little sacs called cephalodia, which contain the cyanobacteria, which is super neat. Just full on everything kind of combining itself. The best way that people describe lichens are they're organisms that have discovered agriculture.
Right.
In the way that they work together and sort of combine to create their own thing.
Right.
There's three main types of lichens as well, like the thallus of the lichens, which are their body essentially, that we like to look at. And so that's your foliose lichens, which are your real leafy sort of lichens. So they're kind of the ones that you see a lot more scattered on the ground. You've got your foliose lichens, which are shrub-like. They're the ones that sort of hang up, sort of like kind of like a beard in some cases. Other times sort of just sticking up kind of like a little shrubby sort of thing. And then the other ones are the crustose lichens. So those are the ones that are like just a crust. You can't take them off their substrate. They're essentially just like oftentimes a circle, can vary in shape, but they grow right into the substrate.
This is what I was looking at my window this morning, on my fence.
Ooh, yeah.
Yep.
Sounds about right.
Yep.
Of course, there's other types of the lichen body, the lichen thallus, but those are the sort of three main ones that we kind of look at especially when you're starting out in lichenology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're kind of like a little community then, in that they're not a particular type of thing. They're typically two things which have, for whatever reason, decided they want to grow together.
Pretty much.
Take advantage of each other.
Oh, yeah.
And neither of them really are. Well, I suppose an algae is a plant. Is an algae a plant? Ooh. Neither of them are plants in the traditional way we would think of as plants.
They're not vascular plants.
Yes.
They're non-vascular.
Yes, there's no flowers and leaves and such. So is this a lichen something that's been studied in botany for a while, given that they're not really plants?
I would say so. I guess botany is kind of the closest place you can put a lichen, because they still technically have the fungus, they still have the alga, and those, of course, are fairly common in botany.
Yeah.
So I think lichens have always kind of been studied among the plants, even though they're not technically a plant. They're their own sort of thing.
So then there will be people, I'm sure, who study lichens because they're interested in finding new types of them and new species and new varieties and stuff. But you're because of this interest in the archaeology, you're interested in them in a little bit more sort of a functional sort of a way, I suppose, in that you're not interested in what they are, but what they do and what they can tell us about things. So tell us about lichenometry, which I confess is a new word for me this week.
Honestly, I'd say it's a new word for a lot of people, even among the lichenology field. So lichenometry is essentially using lichens as a dating method. It was initially developed in the 1960s for like Holocene moraines and that sort of thing. So it was more of a geological kind of vibe. Whereas more recently, to be fair, not too long after it was initially developed, it started getting adapted into archaeology as a method of non-intrusive relative dating.
Right.
So relative dating meaning like, it's sort of using the things around a site to be able to produce an estimated date.
Yeah, so it's a more contextual thing
than
exactly. Something like carbon dating would be, where first of all it's destructive because you've got to take a little piece out and do a thing to it, but also that's kind of the answer you get is a kind of irrelevant of the context in which the sample was taken.
Yeah. So, of course, you've got things like absolute dating, which does include that radiocarbon.
Yeah.
And that is just inherently more intrusive into the site. And archaeology in itself is just an intrusive field altogether, because once you've excavated, you can't quite go back to how it once was.
Yeah, Egyptology.
Yeah. Exactly. It's just not the same as it used to be before. And so any future archaeologists can't come back and look at the site as it once was. So you've got to be real meticulous in your date or in your excavating. You've got to be super careful about what you take. And then same thing with like observing seriation, not seriation. I've blanked on the word. In geology, when there's different layers. Striation, thank you. I was
Go me.
We're on to it. Yeah, I was thinking seriation as another type of relative dating. So I'm glad you know what I'm talking about. But striation, you've got to be really sort of locked into that. Whereas with lichenometry, still sort of got to be wary of what you're taking, still got to be meticulous in your recording and that sort of thing. But the most destructive thing you're going to do with lichenometry is essentially going to be just taking a piece of lichen. And you can easily do that without damaging the site.
Yeah.
And even then, if you can ID in the field and do a little bit more in the field, then you should be okay. But identification in the field can be kind of gnarly, especially when you want to get down to the chemistry of it to get more specific species.
Yeah. So fundamentally then the idea is that we know for a particular type of lichen how quickly they grow, how big they spread on a rock or something over time. And by measuring how big they are, you can work out how long they've been there.
Yes, but also no.
Yes.
So on average, we know that lichens can grow around 1 millimetre per year, sometimes less, sometimes more. Of course, different sort of climatic factors are a really big thing in this, and that's something that's discussed a lot throughout lichenometry over the past 60-odd years. So essentially, when you're doing lichenometry, you need to create your kind of growth curve specific to an area because of the different microclimates. So you look at the lichens within the area and you've got to take measurements from pretty much, depending on the methodology that you're using. What I'm going to be doing will be taking measurements of lichens, as many as I can sort of work out the shape of the thallus, getting those diameters and using that to develop a growth curve.
Right.
To be able to produce, an estimated growth curve for that area and place other lichens in to that to get your further age or your estimated age.
So you're not so much then, in theory, you can go out to some archaeological site, look at the lichen, measure it, and say, oh, this site is this old. You're kind of doing the steps before that where you're trying to set up the initial understanding of a lichen this size in this place means it's this old.
Yeah, more or
Right,
less.
okay.
Yeah. Because of how different sort of smaller microclimates in different areas can be, especially spanning across the world, different areas.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to be super consistent
Yeah.
on the growth rate of lichens, which again, one of the really big issues in lichenometry and why there is so much sort of critique against it. But at the same time, it's something that you can do. It's a really cheap method of relative dating that's non-intrusive for a site.
Yeah.
And so it does have a lot of really good potential as well. And there have been some research using lichenometry which can produce pretty solid, pretty close on estimated ages.
Yeah.
So being able to use it as kind of almost an added, potentially secondary, potentially primary method of dating for a site could be super, super good, super handy. Essentially just using it as a complementary method of dating.
Yeah, well, especially as you say, because it's non-destructive.
Exactly.
And
Absolutely.
so sometimes the better things you can't do.
Yeah.
You need some things like this, and this along with some other things.
100%.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
lichens, of course, are super durable as well and long-lasting, so you can get quite old dates from your estimations, as well as just kind of going into areas where other methods of dating can't. Like lichens go quite high in the alpine sort of areas, whereas radiocarbon starts getting a little bit more iffy into that kind of level of altitude. So being able to use lichens, you can kind of go everywhere. Lichens can survive in space for up to 18 months, come back to Earth and only have minor damage, which is so rad. But also, it just kind of goes to show how durable they are and how much potential they can have if we can learn to use them.
Yeah. So whereabouts, so you're saying that you're trying to find a particular place to try and develop this understanding of how they are in that place. What is your place that you're studying?
So I am just going to be using Northern Cemetery.
Right. So here in Dunedin.
Yeah, here in Dunedin. Yeah. It's sort of a good way to kind of test them out because it has those sort of known dates.
Yeah.
So I can, based on a paper from 2007, I can't remember I think it's assessment of lichenometric dating methods or something, Gemelli 2007. It's kind of one of my favorite papers to reference so far on lichenometry. But they use cemeteries as part of their case study. And so they separate the gravestones that they've measured lichens on into 8 sort of different groups to kind of represent, I guess, sort of moraines and that sort of thing, to be able to kind of apply it into that more grand scale sort of field.
Yeah.
And so for half of them, they'll consider them dated lichens or dated groups, and then the other half are considered undated. So the dated groups are the ones that you sort of create your growth curve based off of, and the undated ones are the ones that you kind of put into that growth curve to see if it sort of works out.
Yep. And the dating you can do because you know when the headstone was put there because it says on it.
Exactly.
It's
That's
just clever.
the one.
It's just clever. Yeah.
So it works out quite nicely doing that and then sort of chucking in the more statsy kind of analysis. I'm still sort of working out the stats stuff, but essentially we're going to be using GEV, so the generalized extreme values. I've forgotten the word for G, but it's like essentially being able to put the extra outliers and kind of factor in for some of those more minor details that differ between areas.
Yep.
So they've got 3 parameters essentially that they look at in the GEV, and that's the location, the scale, the shape, and the scale, I'm pretty sure it is. Ooh, I double-checked this morning, I swear. But they use the shape. The shape is the one constant that they sort of add into the GEV method. And then the parameter and the scale, I'm going to continue saying scale. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. And I promise I did check.
I did striation. Beyond that, I don't know. So.
Works for me. But the other 2 are the ones that change depending on the sort of site that you're looking at.
Yeah.
And so that's just kind of a good way to factor in a bit more of the outliers.
Right. Yeah.
So I still need to work out a little bit more about how I'm going to be putting that into the analysis, but it does seem to be a lot more promising than the previous statistical methodologies that they used in earlier papers.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to learning that.
It's a big part of it. I know we've had various people on the show over the years who, fundamentally they're all about collecting data.
Yeah.
But then inevitably it becomes how you work up the data, how you do all the statistics and stuff to know whether the data's telling you what you want, well, not what you want, to be sure that the data is telling you what you think it's telling you.
Absolutely. To being able to see if it is actually statistically relevant when we're looking at those estimated ages and things.
Yeah.
Which, luckily, I like stats. I'm not super good at stats, but I really enjoy doing it, especially when it's applied into something that I'm interested in, like lichens and archaeology.
Yep.
So I am quite looking forward to really deep diving into it. A little bit scared, a little bit intimidating, but it'll be worth giving me something to discuss.
So, in terms of the age, what's the oldest gravestone in the Northern Cemetery? 1850 something?
I want to say they were open. It's either 1825 or 1873.
Right.
I might be mixing it up with Southern Cemetery right now. But it stopped accepting, I think is a bad way of
new residents.
New residents. Around like 1953, I think it was.
Okay.
Yeah. So, when I do my sampling, I was thinking having the oldest or youngest, I should say, from 1925, but it is going to depend on how many sort of or how many tombstones or gravestones I can really sort of factor in and apply my methodologies to.
And I suppose you need to find ones that haven't been cared for very much.
That is, that is an issue that is there. So that's going to be part of the sampling factor, sort of avoiding kind of the younger ones because they're generally the ones that are more sort of upkept and like spray wash, but also any that are just totally devoid of lichens or only have 1 or 2 growing. Those will also be cut out from my methods or from my sampling methods, which will be interesting. So I still need to I've done like an initial kind of look around. So I know that there's lichens and I know there's lichens that I want to see on a lot of the gravestones there. So that's very promising. But I still need to properly do my sampling and see how many tombstones I can properly actually factor into my sample.
And then
size.
you presumably have to identify the particular species.
Exactly.
So that you're comparing like with like.
That's the one.
And so what do you take photos and then do some sort of scanning and digitally measuring the shape and the size and all of that?
Yeah, so definitely going to be taking lots of photos. Need those for my references. I've luckily, when going into this, I had a background in identifying lichens.
Right.
So I sort of got into lichens in my second year of uni, which was a solid few years ago at this point. So I've been studying lichens for a long time before going into lichenometry. So I do have that background and understanding of the way that they kind of form, which will come in handy for sure. And that is going to be a solid piece in my sort of results, is how I identified the lichens and what lichens there are. So a lot of the time in lichenometry, rhizocarpon, which is a crustose lichen, it's called the map lichen, so it's really pretty. It's got like this essentially black border with like very vibrant yellow dots all over it.
Right.
Totally recommend looking it up. It is a great lichen. And so it's sort of like, it's kind of like the Arabidopsis thaliana of plant biology to lichenolometrists. Essentially, it's our model organism. It's super durable. The oldest estimated living lichen is a rhizocarpon, and that's estimated to be over 8,000 years old. So it's super long-lasting, super durable, and it grows so slowly that it's just, we can kind of trust it's been there for a while.
Yeah.
And so I know for a fact there's rhizocarpon around the cemetery, which will come quite in handy. And also, admittedly, I got kind of distracted talking about rhizocarpon because I really like that lichen that I kind of forgot the original question. I'll admit to that.
Given that this will sort of contribute to an international body of work, are the lichens in New Zealand perhaps inevitably different to everywhere else in New Zealand, such that what's been understood overseas may not be completely transferable to the rhizocarpons here? Or
we've got a lot of the same species. We've just, as per, we've got different climates.
Yeah.
So of course
Okay.
New Zealand is a much more temperate climate, but we do have lichenometric studies that have come out of New Zealand, particularly around like Mount Cook and that sort of thing.
Right. Okay.
So we have studied lichens around the glaciers and stuff that we've got in Aotearoa. So that's always promising for me to see, knowing that we have had it done here. And there was actually, in the 80s, we did have a lichenometry honours thesis that came out of the archaeology department that we've got at Otago.
Right.
Which, again, really cool to be able to read. Admittedly reminded me in my thesis I'm going to need to write what a lichen is.
Yes.
Did not cross my mind for some reason until I read that thesis, and then I was like, oh, I need to define not just lichenometry, but what a lichen is. Which is so bad. I should have known, but
It'll be easier writing than the stats, I suspect, when the time comes.
so true. 100%. I can yap on and on about what a lichen is. Stats a little bit less so.
So, and then the other thing I was going to ask, so the at the cemetery, at best you can go back 150 years.
Yeah.
What sort of time frame will lichenometry in theory allow you to understand? How far back can you go with a lichen?
Ideally, a lot further.
Yeah.
Like I say, was initially developed using for like glaciers and understanding moraines and all of that sort of geological field, which can go a lot further back than what our archaeology is. Given that our oldest estimated living lichen is around 8,000 plus years old, we should be able to get at least, in theory, ideally, a couple of thousand years.
Yeah.
And being here in Aotearoa, of course, we're a much sort of younger country. Our archaeology doesn't date as far back as some places. So ideally, it'd be real cool if we could be totally sweet in at least our archaeology here. But also in theory, further back, like 4,000 years or something, would be great.
But in terms of like radiocarbon dating, that's actually quite recent, isn't it?
Yeah, I think.
Because isn't carbon dating only useful after, if something has to be a minimum age and older? And the minimum age is 1,000 or so years. Maybe I'm making that up, but I think
I think
saw
that sounds
somewhere.
about right.
Yeah, so there's kind of a gap.
Yeah.
If things are old but not very old, then the carbon dating is no good.
Exactly.
So you need other things.
Yeah, so you definitely do need those sort of other kind of methods of dating to be able to either back that up or, work in places that radiocarbon doesn't. Because, of course, radiocarbon, as much as we love it, it doesn't have the capacity to be the be-all, end-all of archaeology, which is why we've got other methods like seriation, lichenometry, which isn't used as much as it could be. But I guess part of lichenometry being not as common is the lack of, its consistency over the years.
Cool.
So lichenometry definitely has that potential to go a little bit older than radiocarbon and into places that it can't always be.
Cool. We're out of time. Thank you, Kasey, for coming in. All the best for the remainder of your research.
Thank you. Thank you
and
for
the
having me.
writing.
Oh, yeah.
And thank you, everyone out there, as usual, for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the Science Notes podcast, brought to you by the Division of Sciences at the University of Otago. To listen again, or to find other episodes in this series, go to Otago Access Radio's website, oar.org.nz, or to your favourite podcast platform.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.